Welcome to Executive Protection Insights, and I'm Liam. When most people hear the word motorcade, they immediately picture black SUVs, police motorcycles, flashing lights, and roads closed to traffic. Hollywood has done a remarkable job convincing people that's what executive protection looks like. The reality is very different. Most of the international motorcades I've worked on didn't have police escorts. They didn't have roads closed. They didn't have armored limousines. Most of the time, we were simply another vehicle trying to move through a busy city without attracting attention. That's really what a good motorcade is. Not a show of force, a transportation plan. The first international advance I ever conducted taught me that lesson very quickly. I'd spent days preparing. Hotels, routes, medical facilities, airport. Everything looked ready. The morning the principal landed, I walked outside the hotel expecting to find three identical black SUVs lined up in front. Instead, there were two silver Toyota Land Cruisers and a motorcycle. I remember looking at the local security manager and asking, "Where's the opening vehicle?" He pointed at the motorcycle. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. That motorcycle completely changed the way I think about international executive protection. One of the biggest mistakes I see is assuming an opening vehicle has to be another SUV. Sometimes that's exactly the right answer. Sometimes it isn't. Think about what you're actually asking the opening vehicle to do. You're asking it to move ahead of the principal. Confirm the primary route remains open. Identify traffic problems. Check the hotel arrival. Confirm the venue is ready. Report demonstrations. Identify unexpected construction. In many cities around the world, a motorcycle can accomplish those tasks far more efficiently than another four-wheel drive vehicle. I've seen it countless times. São Paulo, Bangkok, Jakarta, Manila, Paris, Rome, cities where traffic is simply part of everyday life. While our convoy was still working its way through congestion, the motorcycle had already reached the hotel. The operator had confirmed the entrance was clear, spoken with hotel security, verified our parking position, confirmed no media were waiting outside. By the time we arrived, every question had already been answered. That's exactly what an opening vehicle should do. Another thing I appreciate about motorcycles internationally is how naturally they blend into the environment. Outside the United States, motorcycles are everywhere. Nobody pays attention to them. An SUV trying to move aggressively through traffic attracts attention. A motorcycle filtering between vehicles often doesn't attract a second glance. That's valuable. Executive protection should attract as little attention as possible. One of the most effective opening teams I ever worked with consisted of two people riding the same motorcycle. At first, that might sound unusual. Operationally, it made perfect sense. The rider focused entirely on the road, traffic, safety, navigation. The second operator focused entirely on the operation, watching the venue, monitoring communications, taking photographs when necessary, updating the convoy. Most importantly, they could be on foot almost instantly. If the hotel entrance became blocked by delivery vehicles, the second operator was already speaking with hotel staff. If protesters appeared unexpectedly, they were already assessing the situation. If the principal suddenly decided to stop somewhere unplanned, they were already walking the location before the convoy even arrived. Try doing that from inside another SUV sitting 300 meters behind in traffic. Every operation teaches you something. One operation in South America reinforced that lesson perfectly. Our principal had just departed the airport. Everything was running exactly according to plan. Then the executive assistant leaned forward from the rear seat. The principal would like to stop for coffee. No warning, no discussion, just a simple request. Now, from the principal's perspective, that's all it was. A coffee. From the advance team's perspective, the operation had just changed completely. The motorcycle acknowledged the request over the radio. Instead of continuing toward the hotel, they accelerated through traffic and started evaluating several nearby locations. Not the best coffee, the best operation, parking, visibility, crowd density, emergency vehicle access, multiple exits, restrooms, nearby hospitals, traffic leaving the location. Within 4 minutes, they had identified two suitable options. By the time our principal asked, "Do you know a good coffee shop?" we already had the answer, not because we'd planned a coffee stop, because the opening vehicle gave us the time to adapt. That's something people outside executive protection often don't understand. The opening vehicle isn't there because we expect trouble. It's there because principals change their minds. Constantly. The better your advance, the less disruptive those changes become. One thing I always insist on before any movement is a proper driver briefing, not a quick handshake, a real briefing. Drivers know their city far better than I ever will, but they don't know my operation. I need them to understand convoy discipline, communications, arrival procedures. What happens if we become separated? What happens if the principal changes destinations? What happens if another vehicle joins unexpectedly? One lesson I've learned over the years is never to assume local drivers understand executive protection. Some have worked with protection teams for decades. Others have never supported an executive movement before. The advance tells you which one you're working with. I also spend time inspecting every vehicle. Again, not because I don't trust the provider, because I trust verification, fuel level, tires, spare tire, jack, medical kit, fire extinguisher, seat adjustments, child locks, window operation, air conditioning, charging ports, radio, hands-free communications, navigation, even something as simple as making sure the driver's seat isn't positioned for someone 20 centimeters shorter than the assigned driver. Small details become big delays when the principal is already waiting outside the hotel. Every movement begins long before the wheels start turning. It begins with preparation, and that's something no motorcade can ever replace. One thing I always tell new advance agents is this: never fall in love with the route. You spend hours building it. You drove it 3 times. You timed every traffic light. You identified the hospitals. You marked the choke points. You built primary, alternate, and contingency routes. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. But the moment the wheels start turning, that route belongs to reality, not to you. I've seen perfectly planned movements change because the principal wanted to stop and buy a book. I've seen routes change because a local marathon wasn't announced until the morning of the event. I've seen presidential movements close highways with almost no notice. The advance gives you confidence. It should never make you inflexible. One of the things I appreciate most about experienced local drivers is that they don't just know roads. They know behavior. They know which intersection fills with motorcycles every afternoon. They know which bridge becomes impassable after 30 minutes of heavy rain. They know which streets are technically open but practically unusable because delivery trucks occupy both lanes every morning. You can't download that experience. You earn it by driving the city every day. That's why I always tell my local drivers something very early in the operation. If you see something that doesn't feel right, tell me. Not because I'm giving up control, because I don't have their local experience. Executive protection works best when everyone is comfortable speaking up. One operation in Southeast Asia reminded me just how valuable that can be. We were halfway through a movement when the driver quietly said, "I'd like to change the route." Nothing had happened. No security alert, no accident, no road closure, just intuition. I asked why. He pointed ahead. "School finishes in 5 minutes." That was enough for me. We turned. 5 minutes later, we crossed an overpass that overlooked our original route. It was already gridlocked with parents, buses, motorcycles, and pedestrians. Nothing dangerous, just slow. The principal never knew we'd avoided 20 minutes of unnecessary delay. That's what local knowledge looks like. Not dramatic, just useful. Another part of every movement I pay close attention to is arrival. People spend enormous amounts of time planning the drive, then give very little thought to what happens during the last 30 seconds. Those last 30 seconds matter. Where does the opening vehicle stop? Can it continue through the porte cochere without blocking the principal vehicle? Where does the follow vehicle stage? Can emergency vehicles still access the entrance? If valet parking is operating, does it interfere with the arrival? Does the hotel expect buses at that hour? Is another conference ending? Has a wedding just finished? I've arrived at 5-star hotels where the entrance was completely blocked by guests waiting for taxis after a large corporate event. The hotel hadn't done anything wrong. The timing had simply changed. That's why I like my opening vehicle to arrive first. Sometimes that's an SUV. Very often internationally, it's a motorcycle. While we're still a few minutes away, the motorcycle is already confirming that the entrance remains usable. If delivery trucks have blocked the loading area, we know. If another VIP delegation has just arrived with their own protection team, we know. If media crews are unexpectedly waiting outside, we know. If the principal needs to use a secondary entrance instead, we've already made that decision before the convoy arrives. That time advantage is incredibly valuable. One subject I don't think gets discussed enough is communications. I've seen teams invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in vehicles, then rely on mobile phones for convoy communications. Sometimes that's perfectly acceptable. Sometimes it isn't. Before every movement, I want to know exactly what happens if the cellular network disappears. Do we have radios, satellite communications, a secondary messaging platform? Simple communication plans save a tremendous amount of confusion. Sometimes all it takes is agreeing on a handful of plain language calls before departure. Route clear, hold position, continue to alternate, proceed direct. The fewer words, the fewer misunderstandings. I've also learned to think about the movement after the movement. If we're driving from the airport to the hotel, that's only one leg of the operation. What happens if the principal wants to leave 30 minutes later? Where will the vehicles stage? Can they remain parked? Do drivers need rest periods? Where's the nearest fuel station? Can the vehicles be washed overnight? Who has custody of the keys? Those details rarely appear in glamorous stories about executive protection, but they determine whether tomorrow's movement starts smoothly or begins with unnecessary problems. One of my favorite moments during every operation happens after the principal walks into the hotel. Most people think the movement is finished. It isn't. That's when I usually gather the drivers. I ask one simple question. What did you notice today? Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's everything. Maybe traffic patterns were different than expected. Maybe construction started on a road we plan to use tomorrow. Maybe another hotel entrance worked much better than the one we'd selected. Maybe the motorcycle operator noticed media arriving for another event. Every movement teaches you something. The mistake is waiting until the mission is over to learn from it. I always tell younger agents that motorcades aren't really about vehicles. They're about information. Every vehicle in the convoy is collecting it. The opening vehicle, the principal vehicle, the follow vehicle, the motorcycle, the local driver, the advance team already waiting at the venue. Everyone sees something slightly different. The team's job is to turn those observations into better decisions, because that's what executive protection has always been. Not reacting faster than everyone else, preparing better than everyone else. The vehicles are simply one part of that preparation. The planning, the communication, the relationships, the local knowledge. That's what moves the principal safely from one destination to the next. The convoy is simply what everyone else sees. Until next time, stay sharp, stay prepared, and stay operational.